Saul was the king of Israel, but he disobeyed God. So God chose a new king for Israel, a better king. God sent Samuel to Bethlehem to visit a man named Jesse. One of Jesse's sons would be Israel's next king. Jesse had 8 sons. Jesse's oldest son was tall and handsome. When Samuel saw him, he thought, this must be the one God chose to be king. But God told Samuel, he's not the one. Do not pay attention to what he looks like. You look at what you can see on the outside, but I see the heart. One by one, Jesse's sons approached Samuel, but God had not chosen them either. Do you have any more sons? Samuel asked. Yes, Jesse said. My youngest son, David, is in the field taking care of the sheep. Jesse sent for David. When David arrived, God told Samuel, he's the one. Samuel anointed David. He poured oil on David's head to show God had chosen him to be the king. The Spirit of the Lord was with David, and Samuel went back home. When the Philistines gathered an army to fight Israel, King Saul got his army ready too. The Philistines had a great warrior named Goliath. Goliath shouted at the Israelites, "Send me your best man and we'll fight one-on-one." But none of the Israelites wanted to fight Goliath. They were afraid of him. One day, Jesse told David to take food to the battlefield. David's brothers were in Israel's army. David saw Goliath and how the Israelites were so afraid. David turned to King Saul and said, "I'll fight him." David had fought off lions and bears. He trusted God to keep him safe. Saul offered his armor to David, but it was too heavy. Instead, David chose 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream and met Goliath armed only with the stones and a slingshot. Goliath made fun of David because he was a young boy. But David said, "You come to fight with a spear and sword, but I come to fight in the name of God. God always wins his battles." David ran toward Goliath. He slung a rock and hit Goliath in the forehead. Goliath fell face down, and David killed him. The Israelites won the battle, and the Philistines ran away. David did not look like a king or a mighty warrior, but God chose him to be king over Israel and gave him victory over Goliath. The Israelites were too weak and afraid to face Goliath. They needed David to fight on their behalf. In a similar way, though Jesus did not look like a warrior or a king, we need him to fight for us. Jesus gives us victory over sin and death.
Hey there, I'm Pastor Brian, and it's time for Questions from Kids. Today, Mia from Fall River, Massachusetts asks,
I'm a Christian, but I still feel afraid a lot. Is it wrong to feel afraid?
Mia, let me give you the big answer to that question right off the bat, and it is this. No, it's not wrong to feel afraid. We all feel afraid about something. And really, I think it helps to think about today's Bible story to understand how we are supposed to handle the fear that we feel. Think about the story. So you had the Israelite army who were afraid of Goliath, which is understandable because he was huge. He's this great warrior. And all the Israelite warriors were afraid to go out and face him. And then David comes along and he sees that Goliath is making fun of God, and he had no patience for that. So David goes out and he faces off and fights Goliath. Now here's the thing. Surely David was still afraid. But here's the difference. The Israelite army was afraid, and that caused them to fail to act on God's behalf. They sat there silently as God was mocked by Goliath. David, on the other hand, was afraid but still acted in faith, trusting in God, even though he is afraid. And there's the difference. It's okay for us to feel afraid, but what we don't want to have happen is that to paralyze us and be disobedient against what God has called us to do. So here's a big idea. When you're feeling afraid, remember that Jesus has gone before you. He has fought for you. He is with you. He has defeated the greatest enemies we have of sin and death. And so when we're afraid of things, we can remember that God has given us Jesus to be with us, to fight for us. So really, he's taking care of us, our greatest enemies. What do we have to be afraid of then? And so that should give us confidence and hope that we can still act even though we feel afraid. But there's another thing here, and that is this, that God has given us the Holy Spirit. Remember, the Holy Spirit is always with us. So when we feel afraid about something, we can pray and ask God to help us and ask the Holy Spirit to help give us courage that we need. Courage is not acting in the absence of fear. Courage is acting even when we do feel afraid. And that's what God has given us, the ability to be courageous for him because we know who he is and what he has done and what he will do, taking care of us even when we feel afraid. So what are you most afraid of? And how can trusting God help you overcome that fear that you feel?